Chapter 1421. I'm not, replied Lucy. When Hector popped a piece of meat into his mouth, Lucy hurriedly asked, "How is it?" He nodded and replied, "Not bad." Lucy supported her head with her hands as a smile blossomed on her face. Hector picked a piece of meat and put it near her mouth. She was stunned for a moment, but she soon opened her mouth and ate it. The sky was getting darker, and the city was beginning to be illuminated with neon lights. After they finished their meal, they sat on the couch and watched a movie. Lucy was holding a pillow in her hands and snuck a glance at Hector when she saw the protagonists kissing each other passionately. Sensing her gaze, Hector turned his head around. "What's wrong?" She quickly averted her gaze. "Nothing." The corner of his lips curled upward as he continued. "What do you have in mind?" "And nothing." "I'm not thinking about anything," replied Lucy, her voice thick with embarrassment. She had never been in a relationship before, so she did not know what a normal couple would do when spending time together. Hector placed his arm across the back of the couch and leaned toward her. "Really?" Lucy's heart beat even faster when he suddenly approached her. She slowly turned her head around to meet his eyes, pressed her lips, and kissed him after mustering up the courage. After that, she buried her head into the pillow in her hand. Hector chuckled deeply when he saw how red the tips of her ears had become. He cupped her cheeks in his hands and forced her to meet his gaze. "Is this some kind of a drill?" Lucy blinked her eyes, but did not say anything. Hector slowly pressed his lips against hers. He seemed to have become even more skillful in kissing than he had been a few days before. Lucy grabbed the pillow with her hands tightly as she followed his lead and fell even deeper into the kiss. He skillfully pried her teeth open, and Lucy was stunned. As he deepened the kiss, she was overwhelmed by the suction force. Lucy finally experienced what it meant to lose one's way while kissing. Her heart was galloping rapidly, and she breathed heavily while her cheeks were flushed when he left her lips. How did you become so good at kissing?" Hector pressed the tip of his nose on her cheek, and his breath grazed her skin. "I learned it from the movie." He stroked her neck with his palm and cupped her face in his hand. "So, shall we continue?" Lucy's head was a muddled mess right now, and she nodded. Hector grabbed her into his arms and continued the kiss. She placed her hands on his shoulders and tightened her fingers. The next day, at the Soul Jewelry branch, Lucy was making herself a cup of coffee in the pantry. Her mind was filled with images of Hector kissing her from the previous night, and her cheeks were tinged with a slight blush. She felt that Hector was truly a fast learner. He had already learned how to kiss in just a few days, and she was a bit addicted. However, she was surprised that he had not continued the previous night. She had already prepared herself for it. Could it be that she was not charming enough? Lucy was stunned and placed her hand on her forehead. "What the hell am I thinking?" "Lucy." Naomi's voice startled her, and she nearly knocked her cup over. She turned her head around and said, "Naomi?" Naomi pulled the drawer open and got herself a packet of tea. "What's the matter? You look like you've done something wrong." "I'm not." She lowered her head. Naomi smiled and continued. "I heard you're in a relationship?" "Huh? Did you hear it from other people in the office?" "Yeah." Naomi went closer to her. "You've been behaving strangely lately. You often gawk and giggle alone, which is a bit like me when I had a crush on my husband. So, are you seeing someone, or do you have a crush on someone?" Lucy's heart raced, and she averted her gaze. "Well, I'm not having a crush on someone." Although they hadn't made their relationship public, they were seeing each other right now. "So, that means you're seeing someone right now?" "Yeah," replied Lucy. "Since you're in a relationship, why can't you tell other people about it? You see, those people in the office are curious about your status, so why don't you just make your relationship public?" Chapter 1422. Lucy suddenly fell silent. Naomi looked at her and asked, "What's wrong?" Keeping her head low, Lucy stirred her coffee and replied. We haven't told anyone about our relationship yet. Naomi was stunned. Why? Lucy did not know either. She had never asked Hector before if they should make their relationship public or not. She was worried that the people in the company might talk about them behind their backs if they made it public. After all, Hector was Maisie's cousin. She sighed helplessly and replied, It isn't convenient. Is it because he doesn't want other people to know about your relationship? Nope. So, you don't want other people to know who he is. Lucy was stumped. She did not say anything in return, but Naomi knew she had guessed it right. She chuckled slightly and said, Let me guess. Is it Ms. Vanderbilt's cousin? Lucy looked at Naomi in surprise and said nervously, How did you know it's Ms. Vanderbilt's cousin? When Ms. Vanderbilt brought you to her cousin's celebration party, my sister-in-law said that something was going on with you too. I didn't believe it then, but it seems I was wrong. Naomi covered her mouth and smiled. Lucy felt embarrassed. She had forgotten that Naomi's sister-in-law was Helios' wife. She had been there that night. Oh gosh. Does this mean that Ms. Vanderbilt also knows about it already? Adds Esther. The news of Hector lowering himself to design the look for the celebrities, despite being the owner of Zester, soon spread across the company, and all the employees were satisfied with Hector. Mainly it was because Hector was down to earth. He was very patient with each employee and did most of the work himself. On the second day after taking over Zester, he promoted and gave the key personnel who had been oppressed by Zester for years a raise. When Tridden found Hector, he was in the dressing room. He was instructing a makeup artist beside him. The makeup artist was listening very carefully and nodding from time to time. Tridden knocked on the door, and Hector lifted his head. He handed the brush to the person next to him and left with Tridden. When they were in the corridor, Hector asked, What's wrong? Tridden said, Your family is here to look for you. Hector suddenly fell silent. He followed Tridden into the office, and the few people who sat on the couch were his relatives from Karelia. However, he was not familiar with them since he had only met them a few times with his grandmother. Hecky, it has been so many years, and you've become the owner of an entertainment company. We didn't believe it when your grandmother told us about it, but it seems like we were wrong. They were a lot more polite when talking to Hector right now. Hector sat down on the couch and asked, How can I help you? The few relatives looked at each other and smiled. Here's the thing, Hecky, you're a big boss now, right? Your little cousin says that he wants to come out and work, so we think that maybe you can help him a little. In other words, they wanted him to accept their kids into his company. Tridden looked at Hector. He had gotten used to things like this. Once someone from a family became successful, those relatives who had not been in touch for several years would show up and ask for help. Hector used to be a good-for-nothing delinquent. They were skeptical when his grandmother went around bragging about how successful her grandson had become. However, they still followed her here since they wanted to find out whether it was real or not. They did not expect Hector to be doing pretty well, so they wanted to curry favor with him. Hector looked at them for a long while and smiled. I'm sorry. I don't think I can help you. His relatives' expressions changed when they heard what Hector said. What are you talking about, Hecky? You're a company owner right now, so how can you not help us? Chapter 1423. That's right. We were the ones who helped you when your family was in trouble. Now that you've become successful, you've forgotten about us? Hector clasped his hands together and leaned forward a little. He sat with his legs spread a little and said, The reason you helped my family was that you wanted to get the things under my uncle's name. In other words, you had your own motives for helping us. Besides, I'm not familiar with you all, and since you haven't offered me any help before, why should I help you? Hecky, how can you talk like that? That's all I have to say. I can't help you, so please leave. Those relatives' faces turned grim. They did not expect that Hector would reject them directly. Since they couldn't get anything from him, they did not have the nerves to remain and left in anger. As soon as they returned, they complained about Hector's behavior to Heidi. Heidi made a call to Hector, and Hector admitted it. I don't want to help them. How can you not help them? Did Maisie tell you something? I'm telling you, you shouldn't listen to her. She's a bad seed and disrespectful to her elders. Are you going to learn from her and disown your own grandmother and father? Hector, I raised you. I gave you everything you wanted, so how can you not help me this time? They just want their kids to work in your company, Anne. Hector hung up the call. When Heidi called him again, he hung up. He leaned against the back of the chair and felt disappointment. Only now did he understand why his cousin did not like his grandmother. His grandmother's upbringing had ruined his own sister's life, so he couldn't believe in his grandmother anymore and let her destroy his life. At night, at the Lakeview apartment, Lucy was playing with her phone on the couch. Just when she was debating if she should send a message to Hector and ask if he had left work or not, the doorbell rang. She sprang up and went to answer the door. However, the person that was standing in front of the door was Elaine. She stared at her and said, "You thought I was Hector?" Lucy was stunned. "What are you doing here?" Elaine showed Lucy the bag in her hand that smelled like barbecue. "I just bought some barbecue. Do you want a drink?" Elaine and Lucy sat in the living room. The two of them clinked the beer bottles in their hands, and Elaine turned her head to ask Lucy, "Which stage have you two reached?" Lucy was stumped for a moment and replied, "Not much progress." Elaine picked up a skewer of barbecued meat and said, I don't believe he didn't come to your house when I wasn't around." Lucy lowered her head in embarrassment and did not say anything. Elaine nudged her with her elbow and pressed on. "What's wrong? You haven't taken him down yet?" Lucy pushed her aside and replied, "Stop it. I don't know what you're talking about." Elaine laughed. Both of them ate the food and drank beer until 11 p.m. Elaine decided to sleep in her house since she was drunk. Lucy went forward and cleaned the living room. In fact, she had been listening to the movement of the next door since Elaine showed up until she fell asleep. However, Hector hadn't returned home yet. "It's so late, and he didn't even send me a message today." Lucy lowered her head. Even though she and Hector were in a relationship, she was a little unsure of what was happening. After all, they had just gotten together somehow. She couldn't tell if Hector really liked her or not, but she didn't feel like Hector was someone who would cheat on her. "I must be overthinking." As the thought surfaced in her head, she received a text message on her phone. It was from Hector. Lucy took a look at the text message and rushed to open the door. Hector was standing in front of the door. He stretched his arms out and dragged her into his embrace. He reeked of alcohol. Chapter 1424. Lucy hurriedly went forward to support Hector, and she staggered. She was not tall at all. She was only 5 feet 3 inches tall, while Hector was 6 feet 2 inches. She nearly couldn't hold him, and they almost fell to the floor. "Why? Why did you drink so much beer?" Hector rested his chin on her shoulder and chuckled. When his breath grazed past her neck, it tickled her, and her skin exploded into gooseflesh. "I needed to entertain my customer, so I drank a little too much." Lucy did not dare to carry him into her apartment. After all, Elaine was sleeping inside, and she was worried that they might wake her up. Thus, she carried him to his apartment, but the lock of his apartment was a combination lock. "What is the password?" He pressed his lips to her ear and told her the password. She took a deep breath and keyed in the password. She carried him to his bedroom, and just when she put him on the bed, he grabbed her into his arms. "Don't go." All right, I won't go." Lucy pressed her lips tightly as she slowly moved her hand away from his chest. Let me tuck you in." Hector was drunk, and he stared at her with his blurry eyes. He caressed her lips with his finger. "Lucy," he called her name in a very soft, gentle voice. When his breath grazed her skin, she felt like a feather tickled her heart. Her heartbeat raced, and she replied, "Yeah, I'm here." The room was dark, and the ambiguous atmosphere was like the apple that tempted humanity. As Hector got closer to her, Lucy's heart pounded even faster. When he was about to kiss her, he stopped and giggled hoarsely. "I'm the one who's drunk, but why is your face redder than mine?" It's hot in here." "I'm drunk," he replied with a smile on his face. Lucy gulped and averted her gaze. "If you're drunk, then you should get some rest." Hector cupped her cheek in his hands and repeated, "I'm drunk, so this is your chance." He pressed his lips on her cheek to feel the warmth on her skin and added, "You can do whatever you want to me." Lucy's brain went blank. She froze in his arms and gave up thinking. Hector gave her a light kiss, and her eyelashes fluttered. She did not know if his strong alcoholic breath would make people drunk, but she was intoxicated. "Lucy," he called out to her again softly. He moved his lips to her neck and said, "It's great to have met you." Lucy was stunned. After a long while, she smiled with tears in her eyes as she stretched her arms forward to hold him. "I also feel very lucky to have met you." Hector wiped the tears off her face with his finger and turned over to deepen the kiss. There was a vague sound of susurration in the air, and the two people on the bed were naked. Lucy buried herself into his shoulder, and her fingers tightened. When Elaine woke up in the morning, she felt thirsty, so she went to the living room and got herself a cup of water. "Lucy?" She called out to Lucy groggily, but no one replied to her. She became sober in an instant and went around to look for Lucy. She went to the bathroom and the balcony, but no one was there. Where has she been? She picked up her phone and called Lucy. On the other side, Lucy reached for her cell phone in a daze and answered the call. "Yeah?" She sounded like she was still sleeping. "Where are you?" asked Elaine. "I am at..." Before Lucy could finish her sentence, the man behind her wrapped his arms around her, and she woke up instantly. I'll be back later." She hung up the call. Standing on the balcony and looking at her phone, Elaine seemed to have realized something and looked toward the apartment next door. Lucy put her phone down and shrunk into the blanket. Hector buried his head into her neck and kissed her. "Are you not going to tell her?" I don't want to scare her." Hector turned her over, and she covered her face with her hands as she was too embarrassed to look at him. "Don't stare at me." He chuckled and placed his hand on his forehead. "Now that you've had me, I'm all yours." Chapter 1425. Lucy's face turned burning red. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Lucy was startled, and she covered herself in the blanket. "Do you think it is my sister?" "Oh gosh. How am I supposed to tell her what happened?" Seeing how nervous she was, Hector couldn't help himself and let out a hearty laugh. "I'll go answer the door." He got up and put on his clothes. He went to open the door, but surprisingly, the one standing in front of the door was not Elaine, but his father, Yorick. Hector was stunned as he did not expect his father to show up there. "Dad? What brought you here?" "I'm here to see you. Your grandmother called you again yesterday." Yorick wanted to get into the house, but Hector did not allow him. He put himself in front of the door and looked toward the master bedroom. Yorick was momentarily stunned and saw a flitting figure through the slit of the door to the master bedroom. His hunch told him that it was a woman. After Lucy got herself dressed, she peeked through the slit of the door, but to her surprise, it was not her sister. "Is he Hector's family?" "Is there someone in your room?" asked Yorick. "Yeah," replied Hector. Yorick nodded and continued calmly. "So can't I see her?" Hector hesitated for a moment before replying, "She's kind of shy." "I see. Well, if that's the case, then maybe I should wait for you outside." "Nope. That's not necessary." Lucy came out of the bedroom and offered Yorick an embarrassed smile. She approached Hector and greeted Yorick with a smile. "Nice to meet you, sir. I just live next door. You don't have to go out. Since you guys still have things to do, I'll go back first." She quickly returned to her apartment and slammed the door shut. She hid behind the door, and her heart was in her throat. She did not expect to meet Hector's father so soon. She was not ready for it yet. You're back, Elaine said as she came out of the restroom with a toothbrush in her mouth. It seems like I've underestimated you. You're faster than I thought you were. Shut up. Lucy went back into her room. Leaning on the door, Elaine continued, There's no need to be embarrassed. Both of you are adults, so something is bound to happen since you're in a relationship, right? When Lucy did not reply to her, she clicked her tongue and returned to the restroom to clean herself. In the meantime, Hector got his father a cup of water and said, Since my grandmother has already told you everything, I'm not going to beat around the bush anymore. He took a seat on the couch and said, I have no intention of helping them. My cousin-in-law acquired the company, and I'm just helping him to manage it. I have my own things to do, and I don't have time to help them. If they stab me in the back, how am I going to face Maisie and my cousin-in-law? Yorick kept his head low and replied, I understand. You don't have to care about what your grandmother says, and I'm not here to persuade you to help them either. He knew his mother very well. Besides, his son had turned a new leaf and become a lot better than he used to be in the past. Even his current wife supported his son's ideas, so he had no reason to force him to go back to the way he was. After all, everyone needed to grow up. Yorick lifted his head as if he thought of something. Hecky, that girl is your girlfriend, right? How long have you guys been seeing each other? Hector pressed his lips and replied, just recently. Yorick said seriously, I know it's about time for you to get into a relationship. It's good to have a girlfriend as well, but could she be like that one? Hector interjected. Nope, she isn't. Speaking of that woman, Hector did not hate or resent her. Instead, he felt that he should thank her. After all, she was the one who taught him to be realistic. Yorick nodded. That's good then. I don't think she's that kind of woman either. However, if your grandmother learns that you're seeing someone, I'm sure she'll ask many things about her. It went without saying that Hector knew it as well. At Seoul, Maisie was sipping on her coffee to keep herself awake in front of the ceiling-to-floor window. She was aware that the relatives from the Vanderbilts had visited Hector in Zester. Hector had refused to help them, and she was certain they must have complained about it to Heidi. Chapter 1426. Nolan pushed open the door, and Maisie saw him from the reflection in the glass, turned around, and smiled in surprise. Why are you here? He draped his coat on the back of the chair, and it could be seen that he had a lunchbox in his hand. I'm here to deliver food to my wife. Maisie put the cup of coffee down, ran toward him, and threw herself into his arms. Nolan was knocked back by the force of her embrace and wrapped his arms around her waist. You look happy. How can I not be happy when my husband delivers food for me? She took the lunchbox from him, walked to the desk, and opened it. All the food in the lunchbox was what she liked. Nolan hugged her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. I'm going on a business trip today. The lunch in Maisie's hand became less fragrant in an instant. She turned around and looked at him. Where are you going? Have you forgotten? Tanner has handed the Bronze Bay Hotel project to me. Nolan kissed her ear. So, I'm heading to Houston City to supervise the project for a week. It was only then that Maisie remembered that it was the Bronze Bay Hotel project. Thus, she turned around and wrapped her arms around Nolan's neck. Go then. Remember to miss me when you're there. After saying that, she added, and take care of yourself. Don't get sick or too tired, or I'll be angry. Nolan sneered and pinched her nose. Yes, Your Majesty. Maisie stood on tiptoes to kiss him, and Nolan placed his hands on the sides of her waist while intensifying the kiss. Not long after Nolan left, Sadai pushed open the office door. Ma'am, an old woman is here to meet you. Maisie squinted. She had already guessed who it was. She got up and went out with Sadai. Sadai said she had tried to escort them to the reception room, but they were unwilling to comply with her suggestion. As expected, Madame Vanderbilt had brought two relatives along, and they were standing at the front desk, accusing Maisie and the receptionists. That employer of yours truly loves to be nosy. I'm the person who raised my grandson, but he's no longer close to me now. She even encouraged my grandson to sever ties with his family. Having such a granddaughter is truly a catastrophe. Maisie crossed her arms and listened to their discussion without interrupting until one of the relatives realized she was there and tugged Heidi. Heidi looked in Maisie's direction, and her expression dimmed immediately. "You've finally come out. You listen to me, Maisie Vanderbilt. Hector doesn't listen to me now, because of you. He actually rejected my request." The other employees did not dare to say much. They only listened even when Heidi was complaining to them just now. After all, the company's older employees were very familiar with her. Maisie smiled. "Grandmother, you're no longer young. How are you still energetic enough to come all the way here to create a stir? Hector is already 27 years old this year. Do you think he's still the 7-year-old boy that once lived with you?" One of the relatives stood out and said, "Maisie, you're also a mother. After so many years, you still don't know how to show your elders some respect." "It's not that I don't know how. It's just that I don't want to do so." Maisie did not show them any respect, and her gaze dimmed slightly. "Can you please not flaunt your seniority? In fact, I can show you some respect from time to time, but it doesn't mean that I'll tolerate your arrogance. Firstly, you didn't give birth to me or raise me. And secondly, I'm not close to you. Not to mention that your last name isn't Vanderbilt at all. Why do you love to put your hands into the Vanderbilt's business so much?" The two relatives were rendered speechless. Heidi had been humiliated. "I don't care. Don't you ever interfere in my grandson's affairs again." "I've never interfered." Maisie spread her hands and smiled. "Hector has his own thoughts and plans, so all I need to do is support him as his cousin. Not to mention that he can now solve his problems by himself, so why should I interfere with his matters?" Chapter 1427. How dare you claim that you didn't interfere? Are you telling me that you're not the one who instigated Hector? Heidi was very certain that Maisie was the person who had instigated Hector. He had never refused any of her requests before this. Maisie stood in front of Heidi and chuckled. "Grandmother, humans are capable of change. Think about this, why would Hector want to leave the Vanderbilts and live independently away from Karelia? Have you ever thought about this?" Heidi was stunned. There was no way that she would have thought about it. When Hector had said that he wanted to come to Basburg to settle down and develop his career, they agreed. Besides, it was not bad for Hector to come and depend on Maisie, but who knew that Hector would stop coming home for several years? Thus, how could she not suspect Maisie? "Stop giving me all this bullshit. Getting involved with you never ends well. Let me remind you once and for all. You've gotten married to a man, so strictly speaking, you're not one of the Vanderbilts either. Hector has a successful career now. You'd better stop interfering with his life in the future." Heidi left with the two relatives. Maisie watched as they left, shook her head, and could not help but let off a smirk. Hector sent Lucy to the entrance of the company at that moment. Lucy unbuckled her seat belt, and Hector held her when she was about to get out of the car. Lucy turned her head around, and Hector held her face and kissed her. Her eyelashes trembled, and her cheeks flushed like a tomato. She then thought of something and asked, "I acted rather abruptly earlier this morning. Did I scare your father?" Hector rubbed the top of her head and chuckled, seeing that she was worried about this. "Why would he feel so? It's just that I didn't expect you to rush out so bravely." He thought that she would keep on hiding and dare not come out due to her timid nature. Lucy lowered her gaze. "I couldn't just ask your father to go out and wait. It'd make me look rude. I'd have to meet him sooner or later anyway." This thought actually frightened her. "Have I started to think about our future so early on in the relationship?" Hector paused for a bit, stared at her, and smiled. He was about to say something when he suddenly saw Heidi walking out of Seoul with the two relatives. Did she just go to Maisie? Hector? Lucy stretched out her hand and swayed it in front of Hector's eyes upon seeing that his gaze was fixed on the car window, and he did not respond to her. Hector held her hand and turned to look at her. Go ahead, don't be late. Okay. She got out of the car with a grin. Hector leaned on the back of the seat and watched as Heidi and the others got into their car. After a long time, he took out his cell phone and sent Maisie a message. At a cafe. Elaine was sitting in a seat, waiting for her coffee. When she turned her head, she heard the two women sitting next to her table talking about the new owner of Zester. Is it real or not? The new owner of Zester has been with you before this? The woman sitting across from her had 2 earrings and heavy makeup on. She was tapping on the screen of her phone and laughing. His name is Hector Vanderbilt. He used to be a thug and courted me back then, and I managed to cheat him out of $5,000. That person has become an owner of a company now. Will he still be able to recognize you? Cindy replied triumphantly, it doesn't matter if he's able to recognize me or not. Anyway, I was able to cheat him once, and I'll be able to cheat him again. Besides, he's such a pure and innocent person, and he'll believe me as long as I use my words correctly. The woman did not believe in her. It's been a few years, and maybe he's dated several girlfriends since then. Will he still remember you? Cindy raised her phone. What's there to be afraid of? When I lied to him that he slept with me, he believed it. When I told him I wished to break up, he wouldn't agree to my proposal either. My daughter has grown up now, and I'm still looking for someone to be her father. I can even bring my daughter along when I meet him. I don't believe that he'll deny it. As soon as she said that, she saw someone recording a video of her and stood up. What do you think you're filming? Chapter 1428. Elaine saved the video. Oh, I just discovered the huge scheme in the making. Someone actually wants to bring another man's daughter to my brother-in-law and make him assume someone else's responsibility? Who's your brother-in-law? Are you mad, you cunt? Cindy got up and walked toward her, intending to grab the phone. Unfortunately, Elaine swiftly put it away, and she missed it. My brother-in-law is the Hector that you've mentioned multiple times over the past few minutes. Elaine jerked her collar and sneered. We're both women. Can you do something that will do good for women's reputations? This is my first time meeting someone as shameless as you. You. What's wrong with me? You're stuttering and can't even speak properly now, aren't you? Let me tell you, I despise women who are healthy and capable, but the only thing they constantly think about is becoming a parasite and living off someone else all the time. All you think about all day is how you can get money from men without having to put in any effort. Girl, are you a beggar? Cindy's face flushed and was starting to turn purplish. What did you just say? The other guests looked at them one after another. At this time, the manager of the cafe came over. I'm sorry, ladies, but the owner of the premises said that you're not welcome here, so please leave. Elaine was about to point at herself and say something, but the store manager explained hurriedly, I'm not referring to you, but them instead. Cindy was exasperated. I just got ridiculed by this slut, and I'm being kicked out now. She was completely piqued. What do you mean by that? We've come here and paid for your products and service, which makes us your customers too. So, why are you only kicking us out? The store manager smiled. The owner claimed that since the two of you are conspiring in our store on how to defraud men of money, we can only ask the two of you to leave for the safety of our property and other male customers. The surrounding guests burst into laughter. Cindy's friend looked embarrassed. She had not done anything, yet she was insulted as well because she came here with Cindy. She furiously packed her bag and left. Seeing that her friend had left, Cindy was not shameless enough to stay back any longer. She glared at them and ran out of the cafe. Elaine turned to look at the store manager. Your employer is quite a humorous person. I hope I can get to know him. Generally, when customers create a stir in a store, a harmonious owner will choose to ask the parties involved to settle their differences by themselves while they take care of the customer's emotions. And a more assertive owner would just call the police and leave the matter to them. But the owner of this cafe is different. He straight up asked them to leave without calling the police or stepping forward to persuade them, and he managed to do so with a hint of dark comedy. It's executed to perfection that even I'm curious about his identity now. The store manager laughed. Our owner is a reasonable person. He's indeed a very reasonable person. He solves the problem by tackling the root cause. Elaine nodded, grabbed the coffee handed to her by one of the baristas, and was about to leave when someone stopped her. Elaine turned around, and a man who looked like he was in his 30s came down from the second floor. His appearance looked refined and gentle, dignified and graceful. The store manager approached him with a smile. Sir. Elaine was startled. Are you the owner of this cafe? This cafe had been in business for several years, and she had been a regular customer since its establishment. However, she had never seen him before. The man nodded. You're a regular customer here, aren't you? Elaine paused for a split second, looking a little surprised. You actually remember me? He smiled. I remember all the customers who come to my store regularly. I heard everything from upstairs. Elaine glanced at the attic. It's obvious that he was sitting by the window, so it's not surprising that he could hear our argument from up there. It's no wonder he was so sensible. Holding the coffee in her hand, she laughed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause you any trouble, but the person who happened to be targeted is my brother-in-law. I must stand up for my sister at any time, mustn't I? Chapter 1429. The man gave off a faint smile. Your sister seems to have found herself a great sister. I'm all right. Our relationship has always been like that. Elaine looked down at her watch. I have to leave for work already. I'll take my leave first. The man nodded. When the waiter was clearing up the tables, he found an employee card on one of the tables. Sir, it seems that the lady has left this behind. The man grabbed it and took a glance at it. Director of J-Tech Incorporated, Elaine Xavier. Meanwhile, Madame Vanderbilt arrived at the front desk of Zester and claimed that she wanted to see her grandson, Hector. However, the receptionist seemed to have received a notification earlier, saying that Hector was not in. Heidi's expression changed. How could he not be here? This is my grandson's company, and I'm his grandmother. You people are all useless. Let me up, and I'll look for him myself. The receptionist looked up at her. Ma'am, if you continue to cause us trouble without any particular reason, I'll summon the security. Heidi was so angry that she was about to say something, but that was when the relatives who were standing at the side stopped her. Forget it, so many people are watching us. Hecky might be hiding from you, so why not go to his house and wait for him there? He must return home at night, right? Heidi felt that what she said made sense, rolled her eyes at the receptionist, turned around, and left. The receptionist then called the administrative office, and Hector answered the call. After the receptionist reported something to him, Hector pursed his lips and smiled. Thank you for your hard work. After the call was over, the receptionists all complained on Hector's behalf. Our new boss seems pretty nice. Why would he have such an unreasonable grandmother? Another employee came over and said, I heard that some of the boss relatives came and asked the boss to arrange a job for their sons or daughters, but he rejected their requests. This phenomenon is really strange. Why would he help those relatives? The ex-director hired his relatives too. And as a result, his relatives were the ones who made a mess out of the company. I really fear all kinds of relatives now. In the evening, Hector went to pick Lucy up after getting off work. Lucy stood at the entrance and waited until she saw his car parked in front of the stairs. She then ran over with a smile, opened the car door, and got into the front passenger seat. Because the car windows were not raised, the two female staff members who came out of the building saw the man sitting in the car and were astonished. Isn't that Miss Vanderbilt's cousin? Watching the car drive away, they were all surprised by what they saw. When Lucy realized the car was not heading back to the Lakeview apartment but elsewhere, she asked, "Aren't we going back to your place?" Hector responded with a hum and looked ahead. "I probably won't be able to go back home tonight." She stared at Hector. Did something happen? Lucy had heard rumors in the company that Hector's grandmother had come and caused Maisie some trouble earlier today. In fact, she did not know much about Hector's family. Still, judging from the comments and gossip she heard today, she could roughly get a picture that Maisie had a bad relationship with Hector's family. Hector held on to the steering wheel and was silent for a long time. "Let's go out for a drink tonight." As far as Lucy could remember, Hector did not seem to be someone who liked to drink. He would only drink when something was bothering him, but she did not ask much and agreed to the idea with a smile. "Okay, it's good to get to drink beer and eat some grilled skewers." Hector gave off a helpless smile. "You seem to love skewers very much," Lucy responded with a light hum and a hint of smugness on her face. "Don't you know? Eating grilled skewers and drinking beer is the most wonderful thing to do when you're in a bad mood. The joy of life is all about eating, drinking, and enjoying life to the fullest, isn't it?" Chapter 1430. Lucy had always been a happy-go-lucky girl. She had never needed too many things to satisfy her longing in life. She had always believed that as long as one was alive and kicking, one must know how to appreciate the little contentment in life. Hector took a glance at her. After getting to know her, he realized that she was indeed an easily satisfied lady. Especially her eyes that looked very clear, as if there was always a hint of clarity that disregarded all distractions in life. After entering society, it had always been difficult for anyone to keep their innocent selves. They would come into contact with many different and complex people and inevitably pick up traits from the people around them and grow into someone more complicated. However, Lucy had managed to keep such a pure heart unstained after all these years. It was already very late at night. Madame Vanderbilt and her relatives still had not seen Hector at his apartment. They tried calling him several times, but his phone had been turned off. Thus, she had no choice but to call Yorick. As soon as Yorick answered the call, Heidi started scolding him, but before she could finish speaking, Yorick had already hung up the call. "This father and son duo is trying to get on my nerves." It was the first time Heidi had been so angry at her son and grandson. The two relatives traveled around the city with her for the whole day. They were hungry and tired but still had not received any benefit from this trip. To put it bluntly, your son and grandson just won't listen to you anymore. That's right, it's said that men will start to forget their roots when they have power. Hecky is a huge entrepreneur now, so why would he still remember the love you showed him when he was a kid? The relatives kept on blabbering, and Heidi listened to every single word that came out of their mouths. Thinking of Hector and Yorick's reaction, she started to worry whether her son and grandson would abandon her and whether she would still live a good life after that. It seems that that's my only chance. At the beach, Hector and Lucy sat on the bench, drinking beer. The two ordered a roast chicken and a few grilled skewers. The sea breeze that brushed through them had a hint of saltiness and left the atmosphere humid, which made the environment feel very comfortable. Lucy stepped on the thin sand with her bare feet and stared at the borderless starry sky in front of her. "What do you think? Isn't this place a particularly exceptional spot?" He responded with a hum and turned to look at her. "You really do know every single corner of the city." She smiled and replied, "Because this is my secret base." Hector paused for a bit. "Your secret base?" "Yeep." She lowered her gaze. "Whenever I argued with my mother, I would come here by myself and vent all my bad feelings here." Hector stopped drinking and looked at her. "You came here alone at night?" "It was during the daytime, of course." Lucy approached him. "This is my first time here at night, and you're here with me." Hector chuckled and then wrapped his arms around her shoulders. She leaned against his chest. "Hector, I really want to get to know more about you. He tilted his head and asked, what do you want to know about me? Everything. Hector stared into the distance and opened his mouth after a long time. I used to be a bad apple. Lucy looked up at him. No one's past is perfect, isn't it? He was slightly startled, rested his cheek on the top of her head, and chuckled softly. Okay, then I'll tell you. At the Xavier Manor. Elaine walked downstairs after taking a shower and asked the nanny if she had seen her employee card today, but the nanny denied having seen it. She scratched her head. I only found out that I didn't have my employee card with me when I arrived at work earlier today. Thank God I managed to communicate with the receptionist. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even been able to enter the company. But if I didn't leave the card at home, where would I have lost it? Just as she was about to go upstairs, she suddenly received a call from an unknown number. Elaine drove to the cafe. It was already 10 p.m. when she arrived, but the lights in the cafe were still on, but the closed sign had already been displayed at the door.